I need you to make this disappear. That was the first time I ever heard Ethan Sloan sound angry, at least angry for him. He wasn't the type to yell or toss things. He just sat there in the audit war room, calm as ever, one hand resting on a swollen manila folder full of discrepancies, the other hovering over his keyboard like he was debating whether to hit send. On his screen were 3 duplicate wire transfers to a vendor that hadn't existed 2 months earlier, and a timestamp stamped with Carter Sloan's initials. Right then it hit me. The quiet guy who barely spoke in meetings had been tracking everything the whole time. The truth is, most people only noticed Ethan when their world started to smell off. He was the guy you pulled in when something felt wrong but nobody wanted to say it out loud. He didn't make a scene. He made problems disappear legitimately. No judgments. No gossip. He wasn't warm, didn't hang around for happy hour. But if you left a coffee stain on your audit trail, he'd wipe it clean and somehow make the numbers line up again. He was like a ghost with a badge. One of the last quiet men in a company obsessed with loud innovation. And hey, quick pause before we get deeper. If stories like this are your thing, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Most folks forget, but it really helps the team that brings these to you. We've got more stories lined up, ones that go places. Alright, let's keep going. I joined corporate about 5 months before everything blew up. My role was next door to compliance. Close enough to hear whispers, not close enough to see the receipts. Ethan stood out to me pretty early, mostly because he didn't stand out to anyone else. He could walk through a room full of executives mid-power trip and not pull a single glance. But if you actually watched him, really watched him, you'd notice how his eyes tightened just a bit every time someone tried to bluff their way through a financial ops meeting. Like he was filing every lie in some internal cabinet. Then came Carter. Carter Sloan was the kind of golden boy you send to a strategy summit and pray nobody asks him anything requiring depth. Fresh MBA, shiny watch, and one of those forced laughs that made you wonder if you'd stepped into a prank video. He called everyone chief. And he delivered even basic sentences like he was wrapping up a TED Talk. The man once said, "Let's pivot this conversation vertically," and meant it. And of course, he was the CEO's son. So the elevator in this place only ever went up for him. At first, Ethan cleaned up after him like it was routine maintenance. A duplicate invoice here. A vendor code mismatch there. A conveniently misclassified expense report that listed a $6,000 sushi feast at Nobu as a consulting fee. All tiny things. Fixable things. Ethan corrected the books, quietly flagged the system, and moved on. That was his job. But then the pattern started stacking. Same amounts, different timestamps. Vendors with matching bank prefixes but missing tax IDs. Expense reports submitted before the trips were even scheduled. Nothing that screamed criminal, but enough to bury Ethan's drawer in sticky notes and printed spreadsheets. I caught him late one night, alone in the office, flicking between access logs and Zoom transcripts like he was watching a crash in slow motion. I asked, "Do you think it's intentional?" He didn't turn his head. He just tapped the spacebar, freezing the screen on a line that read, "Vendor, D. Mason Group, $38,200, Strategic Innovation Fee." "If it walks like fraud and smells like fraud," he said, "I don't need to wait for it to write a confession." Still, he didn't send anything. Not yet. He just kept working. He kept cleaning. He kept doing what he always did because Ethan never made a move until every inch of ground beneath him was rock solid. He wasn't a whistleblower. He was a firewall, the kind of person you never hear about until someone tries to start a fire and suddenly every match in their hand dies out. I still think back to that first moment sometimes, him whispering, "Make it disappear," like he was asking for one last miracle made out of paperwork and willpower. Back then, he was still trying to save the company, save the team, save Carter, maybe even save himself. What he didn't know yet was that this time the mess didn't want to be cleaned. It all kicked off with that laugh. You know, the kind sharp, staged, and built to bounce off glass walls just to remind everyone in the room who signs the checks. We were crammed into the Tuesday financial sink, shoulder to shoulder in that suffocating third-floor conference room, like a tech startup version of 12 Angry Men. Carter stood near the screen, pacing with a laser pointer he obviously didn't know how to turn off, rambling about revenue elasticity and invoicing agility. Then Ethan, 3 seats down from me, quietly highlighting a line on a reconciled vendor report, raised his hand. "There's a discrepancy in the Q2 payments to the D. Mason Group. It appears we've duplicated a wire transfer and Carter jumped on him before he could finish. He spun around like he'd been waiting for his cue. Oh my God, Ethan, he groaned, smirking like a kid who just let one rip in church. Are you still on that? You know, at some point it stops being due diligence and starts being a cry for help. Maybe get a hobby, fishing? Woodworking? Something. The room chuckled. Not loud, not bold, just enough to make it sting. The CEO gave one of those tight smiles that basically said, "Yep, that's my boy." HR didn't flinch. The audit lead cleared her throat and barreled ahead with the agenda. Ethan didn't say a word. He closed his folder, clicked his pen once and folded his hands. But I saw his eyes. That's when something in him shifted. The rest of us drifted back to our dashboards and panic calendars, but Ethan started operating on a different wavelength. He stopped asking questions in public. Stopped submitting his usual anomaly logs through the internal channels. Instead, he started printing everything out and hand-delivering it to legal. Old school. Most times he came back with the folder tucked under his arm, jaw locked. One afternoon, I caught him outside the break room staring at a list of payment approvals I'd never seen before. 3 vendor IDs, each labeled Consulting Services Tier 2. All had the same banking prefix, identical transaction sizes, and the same invoice note, Strategic External Alignment. What's Tier 2? I asked. He didn't answer. He just kept staring for another second, then folded the page twice and slipped it into his jacket. That same week I got my hands on an internal project ledger, don't ask, and cross-checked those vendors against every active initiative. Nothing. No projects. No pending contracts. No footprints at all. These vendors were ghosts getting paid 6 figures. Ethan filed the flags. Quietly. Formally. A clean write-up with footnotes and compliance headers, added as a new section in the weekly audit log. But when the execs reviewed that log, the entire section had vanished. At first, I figured maybe Ethan had pulled it back or someone in leadership asked him to ease up. But when I checked the Git history on the document, it was crystal clear. It had been edited after review. Someone with full permissions had gone in and scrubbed the file clean. Someone's scrubbing, Ethan muttered, mostly to himself, staring at the version history like it dragged his family name through the dirt. And they know exactly what to bleach. He didn't yell. He didn't slam a door. He adapted. Ethan stopped using the shared folders completely and started encrypting every audit trail he touched. He kept a personal archive of everything he flagged: dates, amounts, signatures, approval chains. He printed it all on paper, folded each sheet, and tucked them into manila envelopes labeled with painfully dull names like Training Resources or Vendor Cycle A. I watched him one afternoon tap one of those envelopes on his desk 3 times before slipping it into a drawer that locked with a soft click. Every day he spoke less. And every day Carter filled the silence. More meetings. More buzzwords. Expansion-ready invoicing. Vendor velocity metrics. I watched Carter tell the board he was streamlining vendor redundancies by outsourcing support to specialist groups. Later, I realized those groups didn't have websites, business records, or even phone numbers, just payment histories and P.O. boxes in places like Tulsa and Aruba. Ethan brought it up carefully to the CFO. There's no vendor trail on the back end. Nothing on the tax side either. The CFO waved it off. You're overcomplicating it. Carter has signing authority. Focus on the documentation you do control. So Ethan did. Just not for their benefit anymore. That's when the folder showed up. A slim black document case that never left his side. He even started wearing a blazer again, not for fashion but for the inner pocket, the pocket carrying whatever he was building. One night after a late reconciliation shift, I finally asked him, "What are you holding on to?" He didn't answer at first. He just stared out the window at the empty parking lot, where Carter's Audi was sprawled across 2 handicap spots like it owned the place. Then he said, "I'm not paranoid. I'm methodical." And he walked out. The email that followed was ice cold. 4 sentences. 3 attachments. 1 red receipt. Ethan sent the compiled anomaly report, every flagged wire, every matching metadata string across 3 shell vendors, and Carter's entire approval trail to the internal legal team. The subject line read, "Compliance concern escalation. Phase 2 threshold breach." Then he waited. 2 days later, he got a meeting invite. 15 minutes. Conference room B. Legal liaison. Marcia H. The woman who wore double pearls and talked like every word might end up in a deposition. When Ethan stepped inside, she didn't offer coffee, didn't ask him to sit. She simply slid her tablet his way and said, "We've reviewed your concern. While your diligence is noted, please remain focused on internal audit scopes. Strategy level spend is outside your purview." He blinked once. "The vendors are ghosts, Marcia." She gave him a numb, polished smile. "Then let strategy handle the exorcism." He walked out without another word. I found him about an hour later in the far corner of the server room. He wasn't checking equipment, he was just sitting there with his laptop open, headphones in, a spiral notebook beside him. Half a page of timestamps filled the sheet, and at the top he'd written one sentence: "If I disappear, start here." That same week, Carter strutted into the all-hands like a politician fresh off a bribery acquittal. It was one of those cringy live-streamed culture moments where junior analysts had to clap for pie charts. Ethan stood at the back, arms crossed, not clapping. I stood beside him. Then it happened. Carter flipped to a slide titled, "Legacy Constraints." "Now, obviously, some folks get real twitchy when we innovate," he said. "There's always that one person who thinks vendor streamlining is a conspiracy. Don't worry, our job is to help them retire with dignity eventually." The room laughed. Carter beamed. Ethan stared straight ahead, his face carved out of stone. No one said his name. They didn't have to. After that meeting, something in him shifted for good. He stopped touching the building's Wi-Fi and ran everything through a private hotspot instead. He wrote his own macros for metadata checks, skipping the company's internal tools completely. I watched him quietly download Zoom call backups, keeping only the parts where the legal disclaimers had been accidentally skipped. Most people don't know Zoom saves raw audio locally if you enable the right setting. Ethan knew. He'd been enabling it for months. That's when he began building the archive. It wasn't flashy, just a maze of folders on an encrypted drive, labeled so boringly you'd think HR put them together. Inside were PDFs of every flag transfer, exported access logs, line item matchups showing identical invoice language across supposedly different vendors, and the audio. God, the audio. He didn't label the files dramatically, just dates, timestamps, enough to speak for themselves. One night, I caught a glimpse of the master directory name, Redundancy Protocol Level 7. I asked him what Level 7 meant. He said, "That's how many layers down I had to go before they stopped faking it." Still no yelling. No speeches. Just more layers, like an insurance plan wrapped in Kevlar and dipped in battery acid. And every time Carter strutted through the office or called another meaningless brainstorming session, Ethan just watched. Silent. Absorbing. One day, Carter stormed into the risk team's cube area with a Nerf gun, yelling, "Innovation ambush." Ethan didn't even blink. He just hit save, closed his laptop and walked out. It felt like watching a chemical reaction, one that starts slow, quiet, harmless until it doesn't. That's when the security logs started showing print jobs at strange hours. Nights when the building was empty except for Ethan, scanning badge histories, pulling access logs, reviewing folder permissions. He was building something none of us could see yet. I asked him again, "Why call it redundancy?" He didn't look up. Because when the system fails, you don't rebuild from the top. You start from the last clean copy. Then he slid another envelope into a file cabinet that only he had a key for. The next morning, Carter announced a strategic partnership with a boutique compliance consultancy, registered at an address that turned out to be a storage unit in Delaware. Ethan didn't raise his hand. He just wrote something on a sticky note and kept typing. That was the day I realized he wasn't hoping anyone would fix this anymore. He was preparing for the moment they couldn't. Ethan also had this ritual, one I only noticed once I really started paying attention. Anytime he uncovered something big, something that made him lean back and exhale like someone had just pressed a gun to his spine, he'd whisper 3 words. "Got you again." No smile. No victory. Just a tired acknowledgement that the rot ran even deeper. It was a Thursday when everything finally started connecting. 3 shell vendors: D. Mason Group, Valtrex Solutions LLC, NextEdge Consulting, recently approved, all funneling six-figure payments through strategic engagement funds. As usual, Ethan ran the metadata, but this time he didn't stop at our system logs. He traced the IP activity during invoice uploads, pulling back-end access logs from a cached DevOps mirror he definitely wasn't supposed to have. He followed the packets all the way to a static offshore address in the Cayman Islands. A reverse DNS lookup tied the originating IP to a shell registrar owned by a tiny legal firm known for laundering digital assets. The registered user? Jacob L. Rollins. I didn't recognize the name, but Ethan did. His screen froze mid-scroll, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something shift in his face. This mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. Carter's roommate, he said, completely flat. From where? NYU. Same finance program. Same apartment. Carter used to call him Raw Dog in his LinkedIn posts. Jesus. Ethan leaned back, pressed both palms into his eyes, then rolled away from the desk like he needed physical space from what he'd just uncovered. I watched him take out his phone and open a voice memo, not to record a message, but to timestamp the discovery. Everything had documentation now. If it didn't leave a trail, he didn't trust it. He stayed late that night. Said he had cleanup work. But we both knew that was a lie. I stayed too, pretending to finish risk summaries while watching him operate like a one-man forensic lab. He had 3 devices running at once, a company laptop, his personal tablet, and a desktop hooked up to an external drive with encryption so serious it looked military. Every file he touched got saved 3 separate ways. One on a flash drive, one pushed quietly to a dead-drop cloud server, and one synced to a private folder on his phone hidden behind a photo album called Lake House 2019. Then his screen went black for a second, and a Zoom recording auto-launched. Audio only. No video. Just grainy sound, 2 men laughing, glasses clinking. Carter and the CEO. The timestamp read 10:43 p.m., about 2 weeks after the first flagged wire. The CEO spoke first. Push it through, Rollins. Keep it under the 100K thresholds. No one's watching. Carter laughed way too loud. That's the beauty of having the nerds buried in spreadsheets. They'll scream into a folder and file it under Q4 anomalies. The CEO replied, calm as a surgeon. If Sloan catches on, gaslight him. Say he's overthinking. They laughed again. Slow. Confident. Certain. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to explode or at least crack. But he didn't move. Not a muscle. One hand rested on the desk, the other on his flash drive. When the audio ended, he hit save, tagged the file Greenlight01, and dropped it into a folder labeled Board Readiness, Level 7. Then he just sat there. Still. Thinking. After a minute, he pulled out his phone and made a call. His wife answered. She was on speaker just long enough for me to hear her voice, soft and steady. Is it time? Ethan let out a tight breath through his nose. Not yet, he said. I need them to ask. A quiet pause. You always wait, she said gently. Just don't wait until they take it from you. He didn't reply. He hung up and backed up the file again. That Sunday, he came into the office alone. No noise. No lights. I stopped by once to grab my badge and saw him through the glass. Frozen in place, staring at a huge spread of printed ledgers, maps, screenshots, and vendor trees pinned across the whiteboard like he was planning a military operation. Pushpins. Colored strings. Transaction codes. And in the corner, a single photo of Carter and Rollins raising champagne on a yacht. Across the wall, written in Ethan's sharp block letters. When you find the source, stop pulling. Start recording. He didn't ask for help. He didn't need it. Whatever he was assembling, it wasn't for us. It was for whoever believed they could bury him and walk away clean. It all came to a head during Q3 closeout. The final reconciliations had already been submitted to the board packet pre-review. A boring formality most people barely looked at. But Ethan always double-checked. Always. That morning I found him staring at the new draft Carter had just pushed live. An updated forecast alignment memo, filled with glowing projections and flawless expense distributions. Too flawless. The numbers didn't just look polished, something was missing. Entire segments had been deleted, overwritten, replaced with estimates so smooth it was obvious someone had sanded down the truth. I saw it the moment he put both versions side by side. Carter had erased more than $600,000 in payments to two of the flagged shell vendors and tucked the missing money under a new line item called Q3 Asset Reallocation, approved per strategy. The signatures at the bottom? Carter's. Only Carter's. This one, Ethan murmured almost too quietly to hear. This is what I needed. He didn't print it. He didn't storm into anyone's office. Instead, he opened a new internal case file in the compliance log, one visible not just to legal but to HR and the CEO as well. Only 2 pages long but signed, time-stamped, and backed by version history. The title: Falsification of Q3 Vendor Records. Immediate compliance concern. He submitted it at 10:12 a.m. By 11:08, his calendar was exploding. First HR. Please meet us in SONFA at noon. Then legal. Review session required. 1:15 p.m. room 302. Finally, the CEO's office. Availability requested for closed session. End of day. He went to every meeting. I don't know exactly what HR said behind that door. But when he walked out, his face was unreadable blank stone. From what I heard later, HR had opened with soft corporate blows about tone and documentation, and unilateral escalation. They talked about Carter's leadership style, and Ethan's supposed difficulty adapting to modern collaborative environments. Legal was colder. Marcia, the same pearl-wearing ice glacier who told him to stay in his lane, barely let him talk. She clicked through her slides like a metronome, quoting handbook sections about malicious inference and unsanctioned audit duplication. She used phrases like cumulative behavioral trend and disruption to strategic momentum. At one point, she reportedly leaned forward and asked, "Do you believe you're the only one who understands integrity, Mr. Sloan?" By the time he stepped into the CEO's office, they were already deep into the spin cycle. The CEO didn't even sit. He paced the room, accusing Ethan of audit overreach, calling his memo aggressive, and claiming he had created a hostile environment through bureaucratic sabotage. Carter wasn't there, but his fingerprints were all over the script. Then came the line, the one meant to break him, but instead it just seemed to lock something into place. "You've made some powerful people uncomfortable," the CEO said. "So here's what's going to happen. On Friday, you will walk into that boardroom and apologize to Carter. Publicly. Or you'll be terminated. For cause." Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He just tilted his head, like he was finally reaching the last paragraph of a book he'd been slogging through for too long. "I'll be ready," he said. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out. I found him later in the parking lot. He didn't speak at first. He just unlocked his car, set his bag gently in the trunk, then leaned against the door and stared into the distance. "What are you going to do?" I finally asked. He took out his phone, swiped once, and turned the screen toward me. One file was highlighted on his encrypted drive. Final underscore tripwire underscore 4. "I gave them every chance," he said quietly. "They picked their moment." He paused, then added almost casually, "Now I'll pick mine." That evening he printed something, just a single page. I never saw it. He folded it once and slipped it into his inner blazer pocket. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The boardroom that day felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just the mood, crisp, staged, the kind of chill you feel when everyone knows a line is about to snap, but they're pretending business as usual. I watched from the back corner, tucked behind a ficus that hadn't seen water in weeks. Full board present. Legal. HR. The whole power parade. And there was Carter, sitting dead center, legs crossed, that smirk welded onto his face like someone had stapled it there. The CEO stood at the head of the table, performing calm the way a judge performs impartiality when the verdict's already written. "Let's be efficient," he said, his voice smooth enough to slide off glass. "Mr. Sloan, this is your opportunity to clear the air. You've caused confusion, disrupted alignment, and jeopardized strategic trust. Apologize. Or resign." Ethan didn't react. Not a twitch. Not a blink. He rose slowly, like even gravity respected him. His chair groaned softly as he pushed it back. He adjusted his cuff. Not rushed, not dramatic. Then walked past the table and stopped at the projector hub at the far end of the room. "I'd like to submit one item before I go," he said. The CEO gave a weary, scripted sigh. Ethan, this isn't. But Ethan was already connecting his phone. One cable. One tap. The projector blinked, flashed, then came alive. Black screen. White timestamp. 10:43 p.m. Unscheduled Zoom call. CO Carter Sloan, unknown participants. No title. No explanation. Just audio. The CEO's voice, clear, unmistakable. Push it through the dummy vendor. If compliance finds it, I'll just call it noise. Chairs shifted. Someone inhaled too sharply. Then Carter's voice came through, smug and loud, carrying the same hollow confidence he brought to every meeting. Worst case, blame that audit guy. He still prints things. Laughter followed. Both of them. Loose. Thoughtless. Certain. The room didn't freeze. It fossilized. A board member known for being unshakable set her pen down like it had suddenly become toxic. Another leaned forward, squinting at the screen as though sheer disbelief might rewrite reality. HR looked ready to pass out. Legal had stopped pretending to take notes. They weren't even breathing loud. The CEO's smile cracked first. Ethan, he began, voice strained. This is a breach. Ethan lifted one finger, not to silence him, but simply to remind him there was more. A second audio clip started. Shorter. The CEO again, lower, matter of fact. Rollins has the offshore ready. Just keep it under $100K per invoice. No flags. Click. Silence. No dramatic music. No reveal slide. Just a black screen humming quietly over the sound of a room realizing they'd been sitting on a live grenade. Ethan unplugged his phone, slipped it into his jacket, looked at the CEO, then at Carter. You asked for my submission, he said. There it is. Then he faced the board. No apology. No bow. Just a small nod, like he was sealing a vault with their guilt echoing inside. He walked past Carter, who was sweating through his designer shirt. Past Legal, who stared at the table like eye contact might incriminate them further. Past HR, who dropped their pen and didn't even bother to pick it up. He walked out. Calm. Straight-backed. Gone. The projector was still showing a blank black screen when the door clicked shut. But the echo of that audio? That stayed. For a moment no one moved. The air felt thick, heavy, like the room had swallowed sound whole. One of the board members, the kind who usually spent entire meetings scrolling through his phone, finally muttered, Is that his voice? No one answered. The senior legal counsel, a guy who once gave a whole lecture on navigating the optics of accountability, was staring down at the table like he'd just realized he'd left his oven on. His knuckles were white where his hands clutched his folder. I didn't need to say anything else. I placed a single document on the table in front of me, crisp, original, still carrying the faint metallic scent of the cabinet where I'd stored it all these years. Clause 13F. Signed by the company's founder. Ratified by Legal. Bound to my certification as the named compliance custodian. Renewed every fiscal year. Last updated 97 days ago. Still active. The CEO stared at it like it was written in another language entirely. One of the board directors flipped to the second page, and when he saw the founder's signature, the one they practically treated like scripture, he let out a shaky breath. Above it was my name, plain and unfussy, the same name printed on every compliance charter and external audit contact list since 2013. I spoke only what mattered. This clause was never hidden. It's on page 48 of the Compliance Continuity Framework. Every executive receives that manual on day one. Christine added calmly. It's also referenced in every version of the company's federal procurement readiness file. Stratton has it on record. The board chair cleared his throat. And these mirror backup servers, who owns them? I held his gaze. I do. That hit the room like a gavel. He started to form a question, probably something about my authority, but Christine cut in first. She owns them under a separate custodial agreement filed with external counsel. Those servers were registered as continuity insurance during the 2018 compliance overhaul. They're verified under both our risk coverage and federal data recovery protocols. Another director blinked. Hold on. Are you telling us our entire federal audit trail is stored on servers? Not owned by Broxton? Christine nodded. Not owned by Broxton, but registered for Broxton. And under Clause 13F, Access transfers back to internal systems only after full legal clearance and the custodians sign off. That was the moment the silence changed. Not hostile, not confused, just recalibrated. Because the woman they'd overlooked for years, the one who took notes, logged signatures, and kept every policy paired with its legal spine, was the only person in the entire organization with the authority to reverse what had just happened. And I didn't offer it. Not yet. I'll cooperate fully with the review, I said. But until it's complete, no system re-entry should be attempted. That includes IT workarounds, vendor sync attempts, or file restoration scripts. Any breach of that would trigger a federal escalation. Christine backed me instantly. She's right. That would move this from an internal protocol failure to a full violation of federal contract terms. Stratton would pull the bid. The board didn't argue. They couldn't. The system was never built on trust, just verification. Chain of custody. Authorizations. And when they let Tyler bulldoze those controls in the name of efficiency, they handed me back the keys. Keys I never asked for. Just prepared for. I stood to leave. Someone whispered. Why didn't she warn us? Christine answered before I could. She did. Every quarter. Every clause. Every document. You just didn't read them. The door shut behind me. And in the server logs only I still had access to, the federal compliance partners were already combing through the mirror systems, silent, steady, not needing my voice. Just my name. The official memo dropped that afternoon. Subject: Organizational realignment, interim operational safeguards. Buried under 3 paragraphs of HR safe filler was the only line that mattered. Tyler Kincaid is suspended effective immediately pending external compliance review. And just like that, the golden boy with the TED Talk swagger was gone. No farewell Slack post. No corporate send-off. Just silence, and an access badge now stamped revoked in the system I built. Didn't feel good. It didn't feel bad. Just felt clean. She didn't waste time. Mr. Sloan, she said, we need someone who understands the system you built. Someone who can help us rebuild trust with regulators, with employees, with the feds. We'd like you to serve as interim compliance lead during the transition. Ethan didn't answer right away. Not because he was unsure, but because she didn't realize the decision had already been made long before she called. Ma'am, he said, steady and polite, I didn't do this to stay. A quiet beat. I did this so no one else has to. And that was it. No monologue. No conditions. Just a man standing on his porch, rake resting behind him, already finished with the story everyone else was only now beginning to understand. After the call, he stepped inside and opened the drawer where he'd kept the final drive. He held it for a moment. The last backup. Unused. Untouched. Still sealed in its envelope. Then he placed it into a fireproof box labeled Personal Archive and pushed it into the back of the closet. Not a trophy. A record. A reminder of what happens when no one stands up, until someone finally does. Back at the office, chaos sharpened into procedure. Compliance was gutted and rebuilt. IT launched a full forensic sweep of every vendor Carter ever touched. Rollins's consulting firm went dark overnight. The DOJ requested mirror images for Q2 through Q4. The SEC formally acknowledged Ethan's submission. Someone in legal whispered to me that the investigation had expanded to include foreign banking violations. The company kept moving. The machine kept grinding. But Ethan was gone. No LinkedIn update. No statement. No goodbye email. Just a man with clean hands, a quiet conscience, and zero interest in applause. He never wanted power. He wanted proof. And now they had it. 6 weeks later, the dust hadn't settled. It had just spread into every corner of Broxton like wildfire ash. News outlets posted tight, legal-approved headlines like whistleblower-triggered audit halts fintech expansion, and federal probe ongoing in anonymous compliance breach. No names, no photos. Just enough smoke to warn investors without telling them where the fire actually started. Inside the company, the spin cycle never stopped. Ethics protocols. A mandatory compliance retreat in Denver. Cheery messages from the new interim CEO about transparency and healing. Meanwhile, outside that fishbowl, Ethan was a ghost again. Exactly how he preferred it. That morning, he drove to a quiet county office with flickering lights and a parking lot full of potholes. the kind of place people go to change their name or settle a zoning complaint. He waited in line behind a guy arguing over a dog license and a woman filing her father's will. When it was his turn, he slid a single sheet of paper across the counter. A notarized letter. Stamped. Signed. Filed under his real name. Subject: confirmation of evidence submission. Compliance archive ref #Ardell7 final. No press. No entourage. Just a document that now lived inside public record, outside any company server, any NDA, any internal shredding protocol. It was fact now. Untouchable. He thanked the clerk and walked out without a glance back. The sky at home was overcast, the kind of gray that never fully storms but never clears either. In his office, Ethan opened the drawer he hadn't touched since the day everything tipped. The lock clicked softly. Inside lay the last flash drive. Still sealed. Still whole. He held it for a moment, as if checking whether it had changed. Then he pulled out an envelope he'd labeled weeks earlier in plain black Sharpie. If they ever ask. He slid the drive inside. Sealed it. He taped the envelope once, twice, then slid the whole thing into a box labeled Personal Archives. Do not destroy. No ceremony. No hesitation. He didn't need the drive anymore. But he wanted the world to know it had existed. He stood up, stretched his back, and poured himself a glass of water. Not whiskey. Not wine. Just water, like a man who didn't need a vice to rinse down the truth. On the far shelf sat the only physical memento he'd kept from the company. A single sheet of paper from the boardroom. The official meeting minutes, printed and highlighted in yellow. The line he'd circled was the final entry. Meeting adjourned at 11:47 a.m. after compliance presentation triggered Clause 12. G. Immediate federal disclosure mandate. That was the moment the room stopped pretending. The moment the system, late, reluctant, and only after being dragged, finally had to listen. He didn't frame the page. Didn't put it on display. He folded it carefully, slid it into the same drawer as the sealed envelope, and closed it. The system hadn't protected him, but he had protected the system. And sometimes that was enough.